Hi everyone, so in today's video I'm going to be going over how I do horse plates or horse braids, whatever you want to call them. So for this video I'm using my own reference that I've got on my iPad up over in this corner, which you can't really see obviously, but I'll try and get a picture of it up somewhere over here so you can all see it. So yeah, the first thing is obviously to sketch out the braids because we don't have any at the moment. Let me just sharpen my pencil. Okay, so like all the other videos, I'm using the Museum Aquarelle coloured pencils by Caran D'Ache. I am a Caran D'Ache demonstrator, but this is just how I use these pencils for my own work, and I'm not being paid to do this video or anything like that, just for transparency. The paper that I'm using is rowney aquafine hotpressed paper. So just doing this really rough. I'm not gonna do too much detail on the neck, I don't think, just focusing mainly on the braids. So for these little rosettes I'm just starting off with circles, just to kind of get their rough size and shape. Basically just the composition, where they're going to sit in the piece. So yeah, this is just for a tutorial. Obviously this isn't necessarily a part of a particular portrait, but this is how I do it. Okay, so before I add any more details to these random blobby circles, I'm just going to show how I do a general plait. Okay, so now a normal plait goes like this, and then I do these oval shapes. If you can do this, then it just makes horse plaits so much easier. In fact, I'm going to use a normal pencil for this, just so you can see it a bit better. Okay, so I've got my line and then a bunch of circles. So now we're going to start to add shapes to these circles. So just kind of curve them around like so. So now they look like intertwined pieces of hair rather than just circles on a stick. And obviously this helps if you use a reference to study them as well. This is just going off kind of my own studies, how I view them, and this is kind of how I've always done them. I found it quite easy to do them that way. Yeah. So there you go, there you've got your basic shapes, and then the horse plates, the rosettes, are kind of just these, but pushed up, if that makes sense, so it makes that circle shape. And then you just kind of scribble on both ends, and that gives you kind of your tonal values. But that's just basically how you do a normal plait. If you can do that, then the rest is nice and easy. Okay. So now that we've broken down how to do a normal plait, you can kind of see those shapes in this curled up version. So here we go, we've got one plait that then runs into another little ball, and a little bit there, and one on the end. So you can see how these are kind of curving around each other and making that shape that I just created before in the little demonstration. There you go. That one's a bit rough. Obviously when they're curled round into these rosettes, it does change the shape of them, but the line that I just created kind of helps create the general shapes and ideas. It just helps break them down into more manageable pieces, I think. And again, just that one there and a little bit of fur. So I'm just using the sepia 10% pencil for this because it's quite a light colour, so it won't be too overpowering in a line art. And if it's rough, that's okay. So you can kind of see, hopefully, what I was getting at before, and we've got our rough little shapes now. I'm going to just add kind of the bottom of the neck, and then the fur goes that way there, and that way there. Okay, so I'm not going to do any more on the horse's neck. We have our basic shapes. We have our 3 little rosettes. So what I'm going to do now is get some more pencils out so I'm prepared. Oh. I always forget the most obvious pencil, my white pencil. Okay, there we go. Alright, so first I have a steel grey pencil. I will try and pop up all of the colours that I use on the screen as well, and again just cover in kind of the whole rosette and braid. I'm going to go down onto the neck as well, just a little bit, so I can do the shadows later. And going that way, just really rough. Obviously doesn't matter which way it goes at this stage. I think I will actually get a light blue pencil as well, because if you can see the reference photo, there's nice little blue highlights in this horse's black fur. Okay, now I'm going to get a darker colour. This is the slate grey, and just kind of shape out these rosettes. Just doing it with the slate grey at the moment, just to get a nice rough shape. Not too dark, I don't want to go too dark too fast. So I'm just getting a rough little shape. So it's at this point where if you feel like you're not quite happy with the shape of them, you can change it. Making sure they're nice and dark where I want them. Again, being quite rough because it doesn't matter too much. Okay, so that's the first one, and I'm going to just repeat the process over these other ones. So some of these at the bottom will be very dark, so I'm just gonna scribble nice and dark over those. I'm not doing any shadows on the neck right now, just purely focusing on these braids. And like always, just making sure I'm referring to my reference photo for the lights and darks, not focusing on any detail because it'll just get blended out at this stage. Okay, so they look a bit messy at the moment, but that's fine. I'm dipping my paintbrush in the water, taking off any excess water, don't want too much, and I'm going to blend these in, blend the bottom in first, why not? Okay, and again starting at the light areas, pushing that light into the dark and then blending the dark out. Blend the tops out as well, so you can see the shadows aren't too dark, they're not too overpowering, they're actually very faint when wet. But this is just the first layer, so it doesn't matter if it feels like everything you've just done is kind of undoing itself, because it's just the first layer, and I'm going to slowly build up all of these values as I work. And as you can see, like, the details aren't even important at this stage because they're just blending together. So if I tried focusing on the fur texture at this point, or the hair texture at this point, it would have just completely blended out and I would have wasted a lot of time. Okay, so there we go. We're looking very grayscale at the moment. Bit dull, bit boring, very faint. We've got some tonal values down, but it needs to be pushed a lot further. So I'm going to let this layer dry, and then on the next layer I'm going to try and add more colour and push those tonal values a little bit further. But I'll wait until it's dry first. Okay, so this layer is now nice and dry, so I'm going to start building my colours and tone on top. So for this, let me get my colours. I'm mostly going to be using these. So I have the violet, Prussian blue, steel grey, and light cobalt blue. So kind of just going over everything with the light blue, making sure I hit all of those highlights, and as you can see, not being too clean about it, but that's fine. And then kind of just next to any highlights, add in the steel grey. So this isn't necessarily highlight, it's more of kind of a mid colour. But you can see it's already slowly building up those tonal values. So you can see this colour is kind of shaping the highlights, so you've got your nice shiny parts here, and it's just shaping them, pulling them out ever so slightly. Obviously, you know, it's not amazing, it's not got any kind of wow factor or anything at the moment, but this is just only the second layer using these colour pencils. They do usually take a few layers, so I like to do a few wet layers, so I usually do 2 or 3 wet layers, and then all the dry ones on top are the detail layers. So there we go, kind of got our highlights down. Now I'm going to mix the Prussian blue and a little bit of violet to start with. So now this is kind of the very dark shadows now. Keeping them quite soft. I don't want to bleed these into the highlights too much because it's quite hard to push them back if I find that they're taking over. So it's better to kind of keep them, what's the word, further away from the highlight than you might normally want them, just in case. And then covering that bottom one, so you can see that it's starting to take shape now. We've really got those darks coming in. So again, just following those shapes that we created before and adding lots of little shadows to them. And at the moment I'm just using the Prussian blue, and I'll go over it again with the violet after I've done this layer. And I think I might do another wet layer with some browns because these are quite they kind of have a browny hue to them, but there is a lot of blue as well that I see, so I thought I'd get the blue down first. And again, it doesn't matter if you don't use the exact same colours as me. If you see a different colour, that's fine. You know, if you see, I don't know, bright pink, you can go for bright pink. It's just completely up to you what colours you use. These are just the colours that I like to use. Unless you want to be realistic, I wouldn't recommend using bright pink. But if you just want to have fun, you know, use whatever colour you want. So then just kind of going over the colours again with the violet. The purples in this set aren't really my favourite purples ever. I actually prefer the super colour purples. But they do kind of add to that, what's the word? They do kind of add to the shadows, just add a little bit more depth using multiple colours. There we go. So the shapes are starting, you know, they're starting to take shape now. Sorry, the shapes are taking shape. They're starting to take shape now. And again, pushing the lights into the dark and then pulling the darks up a little bit if needed. I'm not going to touch on the shadows just yet. I'm still just focusing on each little braid for now. I'm paying attention to my reference photo again. Now you can see they are very blue, but that's okay because we'll tone them down on the next layer. So water soluble coloured pencils, and I think just coloured pencils in general, do take quite a lot of layers, like most mediums. I think, you know, it takes a lot of kind of building up, repeating certain areas. Yeah, it sometimes feels like kind of going over the same bit again, you know, doing the same thing, but it just all adds to the finished piece in the end. Now you can see the purple ever so slightly just starting to pop out, especially on this rosette here. It's just coming through that Prussian blue, and it is making a nice little shadow, so that's why I like to kind of mix them both. Okay, there we go. So again, got to wait for these to dry and then I can come back for a third wet layer. Okay, so now these layers are dried, we're going to do a final layer with some brown. Again, just kind of going over the same thing we just did on the previous layer, but with a brown, just to kind of tone it down, make it a little bit more natural. Bringing this shadow back, pulling one down here. And yeah, again, just kind of repeating the process that we've already done, but every layer kind of helps create that depth. So it might seem a bit repetitive, but yeah, it helps create all of the depth in the pieces. So it's starting to look a little bit more natural now, not so, not so blue. I don't want to completely kind of cover up the blue, and it will show through the brown really. But yeah, just a nice, we want it to be kind of a nice hint of blue rather than just this overpowering Marge Simpson here. Unless you like the blue look, and then you can keep it blue if you like, but I would quite like some natural looking hair on this piece. And again, this is the same thing I do for all of my portraits with plaits on black hair. So I did a piece with 3 horses kind of a while ago now, but it had a grey, 2 bays, and the bays that had the hair plaited, I did this technique. So I'm going to take a sepia 10% and just kind of soften these edges down just a little bit more. Again, just to tone down that blue ever so slightly without completely covering it up. And now I'm just using the slate grey just to go over these brown areas, cool them down a little bit in some places. There we go. So you can see that the shine is trying to come through now in some of these areas, and that's kind of what we want. We just want that illusion of shine and shape. Okay, so now again I'm going to take a damp paintbrush and just activate and blend these together. Trying to push those lights into the darks. So you can see they're starting to look a little bit more natural already. And again, it doesn't matter if it's super messy, unless you're doing something kind of like skin tone, it really doesn't matter if it's messy, because, you know, hair isn't perfect. And it does blend together when you add those details on the top. Okay, so that is the last of the wet layers, and then I'm going to kind of do all the detail dry on top. Okay, now this layer is completely dry, I'm going to kind of go in with dry details over the top. So I'm just going to add this nice light blue just to bring some of those colours back out, not being too careful of the direction, to be honest. Okay. Now I'm going to sharpen this steel grey, and I'm going to use that as kind of a way to blend in the highlights. Okay, so you can see I'm just kind of blending these shadows into the highlight layers. It's kind of bringing the grey colours back, which makes it a bit more natural. So this layer, or this part of the process at least, isn't really changing too much. It'll just act as a nice kind of blend. Between the other layers. So again, it's really kind of rough at this stage. It kind of comes together once you blend the layers, the darks into light, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to use the slate grey next. So again, I'm just taking my sandpaper. I'm just getting a nice sharp point off it. I find that using the sandpaper means that I don't have to sharpen the pencils as much, and then just making sure there's no pencil dust. And then this is kind of where you can add the details in. And again, I'm going to take the steel grey and just blend these two colours together, because I don't want them to be too harsh, but I find that just kind of running it over blends them together nicely, see? And then going over the darks. So we're kind of getting a bit more grayscale again, but it's nice and natural. There's lots of tones and hues in there still, so it's not as flat as when we first started, although it's not bright blue anymore. And yeah, we're just kind of reinforcing these shapes that we made before, getting those nice little highlights out and blending. when I need to. There we go. I'm just softening up these edges with this pencil. Yeah, this is where you can kind of get a little bit more detail in. You're kind of creating that hair texture now with this pencil, ever so slightly. I just kind of shading in the direction that the fur goes, really. The hair goes even. You can kind of see where certain parts of the braid kind of clump together. So like here, there's kind of like a weird clump, and then it lifts up and then goes together again. And then again blending, and I find it helps to use this steel grey to begin with because it just makes them blend even easier on top. It's not quite as easy if you don't do the first layer of steel grey. And again, like I've said in most of my other videos, it doesn't matter if you're not perfect, it just kind of has to represent what you're drawing. And again, these are very, very neat at the moment, but that's okay because we can make them look a bit more realistic once we've got all of the tonal values down. I find it's kind of important to kind of get the basics down before I focus on the details too much. I'm just going to add a bit more wispy hairs there. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to use the Payne's Grey. So the Payne's Grey then just is just a darker grey, so you just bring out those dark areas a little bit more. Again, you can be quite rough with this because it's not changing too much on the drawing. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is the final layer of the shadows, and then we're just going to use the black. Okay, so now you can see how the layer is quite nice and dark, over the top of all of those layers. So we're just going to use this to kind of add more tones and get those little wispy hairs in nice. So you can kind of start to focus on the details a little bit more now, because this is literally the last layers on these flats. So I just want to make sure I get this shadow in, for example, and then pull it. So just focusing mostly on the ends of each little shape. And it is important to do all of the previous layers first, because otherwise if you just kind of go in straight with the black, you don't get the same depth as you do when you've built up all these shadows slowly. Okay, there we go. So I'm quite happy with that. I think there's some areas actually that could do with a little bit more details, and then I can add those details in. So just creating the illusion of individual hairs now. And again, the placement isn't too important, just the idea of the hair. So if it's not exactly matching with the reference, that's fine, but you should include it somewhere. Okay, so now I'm just going to add some quick little finishing touches over the top with my white pencil, and these are just kind of all little wispy hairs and the highlights. I find adding these really kind of brings the piece together and makes it pop out and add that realism. Okay, so I'm just focusing obviously on all the high points, getting that shine. And again, any little wispy areas. That will add to the effect. So I'm just kind of using, my pencil's not super sharp at the moment just for these parts because it doesn't really need to be, but for the wispy hairs I'll use a sharper white pencil. Okay, so I'm going to switch out for a sharp white one. Okay, so I'm quite happy with those. I think they look quite good. Yeah, you can kind of see the shape of them. We've got all the nice wispy hairs. I'm just going to do some finishing touches, but that's the basics of horse braids. If you liked this video, please leave a thumbs up and a comment. If you'd like to see anything else, please let me know what I could do next.